Hey, so I just wanted to give a bit of a heads up. I have just finished recording this What I'm Playing Plus episode. This first episode of this kind of bonus sort of series for the What I'm Playing podcast. And my plan was to talk about uh both what I've been playing for my backlog this year and my favorite games from the backlog, as well as my favorite games that have been released in 2023. And as I started getting going, in my mind, I was like, oh, this will only take 20 minutes to talk about, the backlog games, and then I'll get into the meat of it with, like, my favorite games this year. It ended up being an hour talking about my favorite games in my backlog. And so I do probably make references to, like, oh, a bit later on, I'll talk about this, blah, blah, blah. But by, I think, about the halfway mark, I was already kind of going, yeah, or about 20 minutes in, I think I was like, yeah, maybe not so much. So that is still coming. I still, as I sort of get to at the end of the episode there, I sort of changed my plan sort of halfway through it. So I'm just giving you a heads up now so that you know. But otherwise, hope you enjoy the episode, and thanks for listening. Hello and welcome to the first ever episode of the What I'm Playing Plus podcast. Bit of a mouthful there. Um, that is a spin-off show of the main What I'm Playing podcast where I cover games and anything I've been playing, news-wise, all that stuff. And this plus episode, or these plus episodes in general, are going to be extensions of that show where I can talk deeper about one particular subject, topic, or whatever I feel like talking about. At length, essentially. These are not. My aim would be to be these like every week, but kind of like every week relating to the podcast of that week. So, for example, this week, even though this was actually meant to be for last week, I just didn't get around to it. Um, but usually this would be like when the What I'm Playing podcast is on like the Monday. This would hopefully be the Friday. But I'm still trying to figure out exactly how to sort of figure out all this and the structure and how many I'm going to do and what it's all in flux. So bear with me while I kind of get my footing and things like that. As the plans can change, so I'm still sort of figuring everything out there to try and kind of balance this with like the Destiny podcast and things like that, and just kind of figuring out when best to cover things since they are every 2 weeks, and so there's always stuff to talk about, but it's also trying to figure out what's relevant, what's new, what I want to talk about, and everything like that. And when it's every 2 weeks, maybe it's difficult to kind of like pinpoint exactly what kind of topic. And so for this one, I'm kind of going for a generalized topic, so I'll get to that in a minute. If you want to check out that main show, there'll be a link to that first episode in the description, as well as a podcast like playlist that you can go to, where you can basically keep up to date with any of the most recent episodes. Currently, I'm putting all of the plus episodes, or I will be putting all the plus episodes alongside the What I'm Playing episodes in that podcast. Same with the Destiny podcast. I'm putting those extra episodes inside that main playlist. But I think if this goes on for a long time, I will create separate playlists for the plus and extra episodes to kind of separate them. But yeah, since these are shorter episodes, these could end up being more often. There could be more of these. There probably will end up being potentially more of these, depending on what there is to talk about. And they might start creeping above, so they might get two in 2 weeks rather than one in 2 weeks. But I'll see how it all goes. And so yeah, so in this episode, I'll be talking about my favorite games of 2023 so far. I'm going to cover kind of there's a bunch of games that I've played for my backlog, or I've kind of come back to, which I'll be talking about I'll be talking about the ones I've enjoyed most, and then I'll be talking about specifically 2023 releases that are my favorite so far this year, or the ones that I've enjoyed the most, or I've finished, or whatever like that. And then at the end, I'll briefly sort of speak to some of the games I'm looking forward to that are still yet to release this year, since this year has been insane for games, and it's not over yet. But still, well, we're heading towards the end of July, but then we've still got 4 more months, or 5 months, sorry, left of seemingly a lot of pretty great games. So yeah. And obviously, if you have any questions, feedback, or comments, or anything like that on any of these topics or whatever it is, be sure to post them in the comments below, and I'll maybe pick it up and I'll either reply in the comments or I'll get back to those comments next episode. Like we can, almost like write-ins, and I'll address anything and whatever else. So yeah, if you and of course, if you are enjoying this and you want to support in any way, you can like it, share it, and everything like that. All your usual stuff. But be sure to let me know what you think would make these podcasts better. I know gameplay is one thing that I think a lot of people would jump to, but to me, it's kind of like these podcasts are entirely meant to be audio. Actually, I'm wanting to look into like putting them actually on an audio platform, but yeah, at the moment I haven't just got to that. But my hope is that I'm going to do some more video proper videos with actual gameplay, even if it's just like one uncut bit of gameplay. Uh, Maybe some scripted stuff. I'm trying to sort of experiment, but for now, I want to kind of find this currently works best for me, where it's like I can talk about games, and sure, it's a static image, but it's meant to be a podcast. It's intended to be something you put on in the background and listen to. But the gameplay thing and the video and all that is heard, and I do think that it would make these better, but I just think that when these start becoming long form where I don't actually know how long they're going to be, it's difficult to kind of fully plan for that. This isn't like a scripted video where I'm kind of like structuring things around it. This is kind of just like it's an episode, you can listen to it, in the background or whatever else. And yeah, but though for mobile users, I think it will be more difficult because mobile, unless you have YouTube subscription service, I don't think you can actually listen to it audio only. Whereas obviously if you're on a browser, you can kind of leave it on a tab in the background and whatever else like that. But anyway, that's enough of that. I'll get to all of that, and we'll see where the future takes us. And so yeah, let's get into the first half of this sort of main topic here. And so first, as I said, I'm going to talk about a few of the games that I've enjoyed this year. Primarily, these ones are the ones that haven't released this year. These are just games that I've kind of, gone back to from either my backlog for whatever reason. And the first one of these is actually one that I remember playing in, I think it was back on PS3, and I remember not enjoying it that much. It was quite a long time ago, and I swear I had actually played it on PS4 before, like when I got the collection, like when they'd remastered them. But I'm guessing I didn't. I don't think I had any trophies on them, so maybe I did. I can't quite remember, but I'm sure I looked at my trophies and I was like, wait a second, I don't have any trophies. Like I don't have. So I was like, did I really only just play this on PS4 now? And that's BioShock. Previously I've played BioShock Infinite. So this was kind of my first, but that was Infinite I'd played and finished, but 1 and 2 I think I've only played the demos of, and then on PS3 I think I did get BioShock actually. I'm sure I have BioShock on PS3. Maybe not, but I'm sure I played at least the demo of it, but I remember not particularly enjoying it or finding it difficult or something like that many years ago. And as I said, I thought I bought the collection and then apparently didn't play them, seemingly, or maybe I didn't get very far and kind of gave up very quickly. And I nearly, like, almost wondered if I was going to do the same with this, because I'll be totally honest now, maybe it's because, so obviously, like, I'm going to try and avoid spoilers for BioShock, just for anyone that hasn't played it, but I don't want to also say anything that might be considered a spoiler, so you might want to skip just in case I kind of, like, suggest things, but essentially, like, I knew that there was a twist in BioShock, like, in the story somewhere, and I think I sort of knew what it was, but when I was playing it, like, it wasn't, like, on my mind kind of thing, but when it happened, it was kind of like, it was a cool moment, but I think by that point, it felt like I'd been playing the game quite a bit already, and that felt like it was only, like, halfway through the game, or, like, 60% through, and the game carries on for quite a while after that, and I felt that that was a really weird decision, because it felt kind of like, hang on a minute, like, we've just spent a lot of time getting to this point in the first place. It was a cool reveal, and then you spend ages kind of carrying on, and I think it just goes on a bit too long, and the pacing kind of really suffers for it because you're on a flow, you have that twist, you're like, oh my god, this is cool. But just overall, I just didn't quite find that. I mean, the twist was cool, but I don't think it was. I think because I knew that there was something, and because I think I vaguely knew what it was, and I'd sort of seen part of the scene before that it was related to, not fully, but like I couldn't remember it enough to put context and be like, oh, this is exactly what happens. But I remembered like how it looked a little bit, the main room that you're in and what happens in that room during this, twist. So I think that could have been part of it. I do think it is a good twist. Like, it's not like I'm saying it's a bad twist or anything. I think it is a really cool twist and very, very smart. But I for some reason it just didn't land particularly well with me entirely, which is a shame. Because I do think it is a good twist, as I said, so maybe sort of knowing about it. But I will say, other than that, I think the setting of BioShock and the world building and the dialogue and the music and just the overall vibe and the tone and the visuals is some of the best I've seen in the game. It really, really sells this setting extremely well. And it is the idea of this underwater city, Rapture, is such a cool idea, and it feels so alive and it feels so lived in, and like so much has happened there. And like it's deep with lore and background and backstory and everything, and it's something that just feels like if I, like I could there's so many like areas of the game that I can easily remember how they look like, so many kind of iconic looking areas. Like, I mean, it was fairly recently that I played it, but I say that, but it was back in, I want to say it was January actually, but I think it was maybe February, Marchish time. I'm not too sure. This year's gone quick, honestly. There's been a lot of games. But yeah, I really like the setting, and in like even the combat. Like, I remember, I think because back on PS3, I think there was not any performance issues, but having that and the combat does kind of feel a bit clunky. It doesn't quite feel that great, and so back on PS3, if there's performance issues, and I'm not at that point. I think I was fairly young at the time, so maybe my skill isn't as good as it is now. I'm pro level gamer now, promise. Um, I look, everyone's been like, I know he's not actually that good. I beat God of War on Gimme God of War and Queen Valkyrie without taking a hit, which, I mean, is not that difficult considering you die in 2 hits anyway. But whatever. Anyway, yeah, I didn't really have too much problem now. I could see how I could find it difficult back then, but what was interesting was I realized I was like, oh wait, you die, but you just respawn in the level because you have the fighter chambers or whatever. Um, so I don't actually know why I found it difficult before. I don't know if there was a I don't, because I'm sure I remember like feeling like you don't have enough ammo, and I don't think I really ran into that issue at all. But I think this time I was also messing around with the abilities more, because that's another thing. I think I also was like, oh, I want to use the abilities all the time, and I think what I didn't realize back then was that like the electric, like the shock ability you get is kind of intended. You kind of set them up and then you hit them with the wrench for like more damage or whatever, and that's the one thing that I don't think I've quite got my head around back when I was younger. I thought it was just like, oh, you run out of ability so quickly, whereas obviously when I've played it recently, I did that for a while, so I was actually stocking up on ammo because I started off doing things, and I was doing things like shocking turrets and things like that. Um, and I've always liked, that's one thing I've always liked about BioShock is the kind of combination between your ability in one hand and your gun in the other. And I just think that's such a cool combination, and I especially like that in BioShock Infinite, which is I've wanted to play. It's funny because I want to play BioShock Infinite like most, but I feel like I should play BioShock 2 just because then otherwise I'm gonna have this like missing, I've got this gap in between, which I know wasn't directed by Ken Levine. That was kind of like, but I think BioShock 1 was him, and then he moved on to Infinite. Now he's obviously on Judas. Which is funny because if Judas is anything like BioShock, it's honestly like I'm honestly a lot more interested in Judas now because of playing BioShock. And it's funny because when I think Max BioShock, even if it didn't land like that, twist didn't land well, it's still a really cool game, and it's almost one I want to replay just to kind of be in that world again and mess around with the combat and things like that and the different weapons. And it was actually a lot deeper than I actually realized back when I sort of went into this. It was, you've got like the um you can upgrade your weapons as you kind of go through the game, which I had no idea was a thing. You can upgrade your abilities, you can upgrade health and all this stuff. And I think there's a lot of this that I didn't quite realize um, when I first played it. And yes, so sort of it was kind of a lot of discovery and kind of like, oh, that's cool. I didn't realize it has this, and of course it has a weapon wheel as well, which we don't. That's one thing about BioShock Infinite you don't have. Which weird. I'm of two minds. I really like weapon wheels, but at the same, like when you have all your different weapons on a radial menu, I like that when you can hold everything, but I also do like the BioShock Infinite approach. Of, like, you only have two weapons. I do think for a game like BioShock, it maybe works better when you have multiple weapons, kind of thing. Um, it reminds me how like Resistance on PS3 was. Resistance, the first Resistance had a weapon wheel. Resistance 2 went to like the two gun approach, and then Resistance 3 brought back the weapon wheel. And I think it was better off for it, to be honest. I think these weapons, if you have cool weapons, or if you want to have meaningful upgrades and progression for those weapons, then yeah, you want to have the sort of weapon wheel approach sort of thing. Um, so I think that probably does work better for something like Bioshock. But at the same time, I like the idea of just having it's easy, simple, two weapons swap between. I actually do remember on PS3 running out of ammo. I think on Bioshock Infinite as well. But so I'm interested to know how it all goes. There's a lot of games that I played when I was younger that I remember being a certain way, and then when I go back to, they're a different way. Not necessarily from like a visual standpoint, but just from like a, oh, I remember this being difficult. Like Ratchet and Clank 1 is like a perfect example. I remember finding that game really difficult, particularly the final boss. I spent ages on it. And then when I replayed it sort of recently, I think it was a couple of years ago, and the last time before that, I think I struggled a little bit, but then I was like, man, I don't know why. I don't know how I struggled. And I remember when I platinumed This is obviously a different situation entirely, really. But when I platinumed Ratchet and Clank 1, I literally used the Rhino on the Drek at the end, and the Rhino, for anyone who doesn't know, the Rhino is basically the Rhino has changed kind of throughout the games, but the Rhino generally was this like fully automatic rocket launcher that just fires rockets, constantly. And it's so funny when you like fight him with that because his health just like gets totally melted. It's very as the gun stands for, Rhino standing for rip you a new one. It's certainly certainly lives up to the name. But yeah, that's Bioshock. As I said, I do almost want to go back to it, but I want to go back to Bioshock. When I next go back, I think I'm going to go to Bioshock 2, because then I want to go to Infinite after that, because I'm really looking forward to playing Infinite again. Plus, I never played the DLCs for Infinite as well. The Burial at Sea, which obviously is back in, I think it's Elizabeth is the name of the companion, I think. And you play as her, I believe, in Rapture, and so that I'm really curious to know how that ties into the main game. Because I heard mixed things when it came out, but since then I've heard positive things. So yeah, curious to know what that's about. And so yeah, next, after talking about Bioshock, I'm going to talk about Call of Duty Black Ops 3, which is totally off the beaten path. We're not talking about single player games now, as such. But this was basically basically one of the co-op game that I could play with my sister. And it was kind of one that me, my sister, and my dad were playing, essentially, and it's obviously a perfect game for the family. But we were playing zombies, and it occurred to me, I was like, man, I was like thinking of like co-op games we could all play. And I was like, why like what like why has zombies not has only just kind of only earlier this year kind of like, or is either earlier this year or it's actually it might have even been late last year actually. But it kind of like came to mind. I was like, holy crap, why have I not thought of this? And playing this, so playing Black Ops 3, got all the DLCs, and I've got the Zombies Chronicles DLC as well, which is typically where we played most. Um, but playing it reminded me how much I actually miss zombies, and also reminds me how much it's kind of gone off rails since Black Ops 3. Um, and it was after Black Ops 3 was the last Call of Duty game that I was pretty invested in, I think, outside of Modern Warfare 2019. But even that, I kind of gave up on, even though I thought it was good multiplayer wise. But Black Ops 3 I actually don't think I gave it enough credit for the amount of sort of varied ideas it has. And I got a list of a few things it has here. You've obviously got, the campaign, which you could play in co-op. You've got multiplayer, zombies. You've got the Nightmare campaign, which is basically the single player, or the single player co-op campaign, just reorganized with zombies as enemies, with a sort of vague story. I think. I never really played it, but it didn't seem very good. But well. Um, but it doesn't matter, because then you've also got these free run challenges where you could, the game had like the exosuits where you could run along walls kind of thing, and you would essentially be running along walls, and you have to do these like courses, and I think there's only 4 of them, but you could see how quick you could do it. What's the quickest time you could sort of complete it in. And then you also, I think this was the first game that introduced like kind of interconnected progression across different modes, not so much for weapon levels in terms of attachments, but in terms of like camo unlocks. Like you can unlock stuff in campaign, zombies, and multiplayer, and then you could use them in each of those modes. And it was just like what I was saying about that Nightmare campaign, the Zombies campaign. I was saying it wasn't very good, and it doesn't matter. And it's like, it doesn't matter because essentially what I mean is that it was an experiment, and it was additive to what you already got. It wasn't like, oh, we're taking a shot at something new, and it didn't, and we're replacing something else. It's like, no, a lot of stuff in Black Ops 3 is a lot of new ideas and a lot of experimentation. I don't like all of it because, like, for example, in Zombies, you have the Gobblegum system, which is kind of like essentially like bonus perks you can have, which is kind of, I don't want to say it's pay to win, but that you could argue it is that. Um, but it's tied to like an RNG loot box style system, of how you get them, and it's frustrating because everything else is so good in Zombies, or it feels like so good. It's kind of like the best version of Zombies, and that kind of taints it because it kind of takes away from some of that progression that you would otherwise get. Because you could earn Gobblegums by you could complete like daily challenges by getting a currency that you could then spend on these sort of rolls, and I think they do sales pretty often where you can buy, COD points for cheap, use COD points to buy a bundle of those for cheap. Um, but it's like, if that was easier and better on like the gameplay aspect where it was more rewarding, it would fit in the game a lot better. Especially now that that's not their main source of revenue, I assume, because I assume that they're sort of working on, the more recent CODs is kind of where they get most of their revenue from. Um, but even so, I think this is like the best version of zombies that there is, and it's nice to have that on current gen because obviously a lot of the other zombie stuff is locked away back on like PS3 and Xbox 360 and whatever. And I think the only downside is that I prefer a lot of the weapons in those older games, kind of thing, like the World at War weapons and the Black Ops 1 weapons I liked most. I don't remember much about Black Ops 2, but it really bothers me because I'm like, I just feel like Zombies has never quite been given the proper development time it deserved, and it always feels like, man, there's so much you could do with Zombies, and ideally we just want one game where you can just have everything, you know, everything you can earn. Yeah, every you can play every map, you can have all the weapons, and and there's always been like conversation of like, oh, a zombies game, but it's like, but if they do that, it's like, because what zombies has now become, they've kind of turned zombies more into like a PVE style sort of shooter in Black Ops Cold War at least, where you can kind of like upgrade your weapons permanently, and then you can drop in, you can start off the game with any weapon you want, kind of thing, and then you can upgrade your weapon through pack a punch, but you can also upgrade it through different rarity tiers, and then there's crafting, and then there's kill streaks, and it's just a mess. I'm not saying that that can't work, but it's like what made zombies so fundamentally fun from the get go is that it was pure survival. You start off with just a pistol, and as you get points, you can buy weapons, you can upgrade weapons, you can get the mystery box, which is like an RNG thing. What you don't know what gun you're gonna get, and there are some really powerful guns in there that you typically want, but then there are some trade-offs to them. For example, like the ray gun is obviously what most people want, but I don't know if it was ever a thing. I think it might have always been a thing. But essentially, if you shoot it at the ground or near you, it has splash damage. So if you shoot a zombie that's in front of you and it hit, it might hit the zombie, might kill the zombie, but it's going to hit you as well. And so they've got a bit of a trade off to them, and then certain weapons like the Thunder Gun, super powerful, but only really, it's limited on ammo, so you don't want to like go and use it all at once, sort of thing. And it was like pure survival. And then as time went on, they started introducing these what started as like Easter eggs, and then became like these actual quests and stories, which were hidden, and I think they were always a little bit sort of vague and sort of nonsensical in the requirements of like, oh, shoot this thing for some reason, like this thing that no one's going to see, and it's stuff like that is a little bit ridiculous. But the map that we played quite a lot was the Drak, I think is what it's pronounced, which is a castle saying like the mountains somewhere, and it's like it's snowing outside, but then you've got like catacombs underneath, and then you've got this sort of main hall that's got all these computer screens in, and it's very almost like sci-fi. But you can find and complete these kind of like short quests that'll unlock these bows, and then you can do an extra quest that then upgrades these bows, and these have like insane powers. Like one of them is you kind of like shoot. I think one's like an electric one, but one also creates like these mini kind of like, is it like when no, it's I'm sure there's one that kind of blows zombies away and things like that. But then there is one that has like chaining electricity or something, or it creates like this. It's something like that, but they're just super powerful, essentially, and it was really fun kind of getting those. I think the most frustrating thing about zombies is that you put in a lot of effort, and then if you die, then you have to restart it all. But that's kind of part of, that just comes with the game, comes with the territory sort of thing. But it is, just looking back to Black Ops 3, I was like, man, there is actually a lot here, and I mean, even sort of talking about it now, it's like there is this, I don't feel as much like playing it now as I did back then, but I spent a ton of hours on it this year, honestly, and a lot of people will meme on Call of Duty because it's Call of Duty, but Zombies was always something that I'm just like, this has potential to kind of go beyond, the typical standard Call of Duty, and that's obviously what they've done sort of with Black Ops Cold War and stuff, but it just also feels like same with what they did with Black Ops 4. They started introducing these ideas. Honestly, I went and tried Black Ops 4 Zombies after playing Black Ops 3 again, and that has got to be one of the worst experiences in a game I've had. It's not even, it's so bad. Like, I can't even believe that was where Zombies went after Black Ops 3, and it felt, when I going from 3 to 4, not only did the game feel different, everything looked different, they introduced a ton of new systems, it was a different story, but then it was also like the same story. They also didn't even have proper cutscenes anymore. it was just it was a real mess. And there's a few good YouTube videos I was watching sort of on the development and just like or just Black Ops 4 in general at the time that was just kind of like they didn't need to do it this way, and they did, and it's a shame because I think they totally lost it. And that's also why it's like, man, I would love a zombies game, but it's like, but the thing is, if you do a zombies game, you need to be like keep zombies core to what it always has been, or if you're going to expand off and do other things, make sure you are catering to that crowd because there's a lot of good in zombies, and it sort of deserves to be, you know, it deserves to be what's the word? Um, I can't remember the word. Basically, yeah, it just deserves to be looked after, you know, and kept in a good state. And yeah, I just think it's underwhelming to see where it's gone. But Black Ops 3, honestly, it's really good, and all the DLC maps, especially Zombies Chronicles. I remember when that came out, was such an awesome thing because it was like, oh my god, you're bringing back all these maps. I think the only disappointment I have is that it doesn't have Mob of the Dead, which was the Alcatraz map, which I loved on Black Ops 2. Um, and yeah, preserved. That was the word I was looking for. Black Ops 3 Zombies deserves to be preserved, and it doesn't deserve to be thrown into this yearly cycle of Call of Duty releases. It needs to have time to be worked on its own, and I think existing on its own would do that mode and the franchise good, honestly. Um, but then it's also, of course, when you start thinking about where they're going to add in MTX and stuff like that, you start losing what makes it special because you're like, oh, it's getting overshadowed by the desire to make money, you know. But yes, Black Ops 3, really enjoyed it. Very cool to go back to. And if you want a co-op game, totally recommend it. And of course, if you had PS Plus, and if you're on PlayStation, if you had PS Plus and you picked it up on the PS Plus collection, you should still have access to that. And I believe it was the Black Ops 3 Zombies Chronicles edition. So you'll not only have the base game, you'll also have 8 remastered maps from Black Ops 1. Sorry, World at War, Black Ops 1, and Black Ops 2. Um, including Origins. Origins is an awesome map, by the way. I think at some point I want to talk properly about Black Ops 3 because there's just so many cool things. And I was even thinking about writing an article on it earlier this year because there's just, I really want to shine a light on how good that game is, and what it was doing, and even if it doesn't succeed in a bunch of its ideas, it has a lot of ideas and it tries a lot of different things. It takes risks. It doesn't succeed on many of them across the game. Like the campaign didn't have the greatest story, but then I was talking to someone a while back that was telling me that there's actually a lot more to that story, and there's actually a lot you can peel back, and it's actually really interesting the way it's put together. It's also very confusing. Most people will look at it and go, "Oh yeah, train go boom," because that was the sort of memed upon line from that campaign. But yeah, Black Ops 3, very cool, and recommend it. We're also 27 minutes in, and I'm only 2 games in, and I have like another 12. So I don't know if this is going to get split into 2 parts or not, because I'm feeling like I'm taking a while. I might do like maybe this will get split into. I'll be like, oh, this is my favorite games from my backlog, part 1 and then part 2, and then we'll release them separately or something. Only because I don't want this being super long. I don't want this being like as long as like the main episodes. That sounds like I'm stretching content, but it's or like I'm sort of piecemealing things, but it's like I'm not. It's like, we'll see. We'll see where it goes. Anyway, next game. Don't know if I would count this as one of my favorite games this year necessarily, but I wanted to throw it in here because I haven't actually really had a chance to talk about it properly, and that's God of War Ragnarok, which was probably, to be fair, what I would consider my game of the year for 2022. That's not something I thought about terribly long. Well, actually, no, I say that. Maybe something like Ghostwire would have been that, but anyway, that's not the point. We're not talking about that. I haven't actually posted a top 10 or top games of 2021 or 22, I think, which is something I'm behind on, which is something I usually have done. That was usually the main thing that I would actually get done each year, but I got later and later each year, and then it just stopped happening. But yeah, so I think Ragnarok was potentially up there with my game of the year last year, unless you count like Dark Souls 1 or 3. If I'm counting backlog games, if that was like my favorite game played that year. But I basically went back earlier this year to kind of get the platinum on it. I did a bunch of the side content, and it was actually not long after I finished all of that, New Game Plus just launched, which was really good timing because that was kind of what I'd been waiting for a while. But it was good timing, but also kind of threw me into a questionable state because I was like, well, I started New Game Plus and I played a bit on that, but I had always said to myself that I was going to restart the game on Give Me God of War difficulty because that's what when I eventually replayed God of War 2018 on that difficulty and really enjoyed it. Because I enjoyed it. There were a few inconsistencies and it exposed a lot of problems in the combat, but it was still fun and it was kind of interesting because I felt like it let the RPG elements take a little bit more center stage because you kind of had to think about things a little bit more. I'm hoping that might be more of the case here because I still don't know how I feel about RPG elements in God of War. I don't know if it really feels the greatest overall. Um, but yeah, I think for thoughts on God of War, Ragnarok in particular, I sort of feel a bit disappointed with it on the whole because I think the story felt kind of rushed, honestly. And I think we sort of know this is the case to some extent anyway, because they were originally going to make 3 games, and then they were like, "Oh no, they can do it all in the second." And I think what happens is that the first half of the game takes a while, like takes its time getting through the events of the game, and then the second half is like throwing things back to back to back, and you don't really get enough time to kind of marinate on anything or sort of think about it or anything like that because you're just sort of it's just moving from one thing to the next kind of thing. And there's a lot of cool ideas, but what ends up happening is that like the name of the game, the thing that is like the game's meant to be about, ends up being really short and really underwhelming. And it has a lot of good moments in the story. There's actually some very memorable and iconic moments that almost match up to, or I say almost kind of do match up to, uh, the ones in 2018. Like I think back to like when you get the blades, which is an awesome scene, honestly. When you get the blades of chaos back in 2018, it's probably one of my favorite scenes in a game because it's so masterfully done. And there are a couple of scenes like that in this game that are also masterfully done that I think really have a strong payoff essentially. But I just feel like this, and I don't think I don't want to get too much into spoilers. Though I would imagine more people have played. Like I said earlier, I didn't want to spoil anything about BioShock, but I would want to say more people have played Ragnarok compared to BioShock, maybe. Um, but I just really feel like without I'll try and not spoil anything, but um, I just sort of feel like they wrapped up Kratos' story really well. I thought him like all the characters I didn't get a good amount of time. A lot, well, most of them do. Some of them not so much. Um, but then yeah, again, I'll try again. It's sort of I guess spoiler territory. It's going to be difficult to kind of dodge around it, but the actual events of Ragnarok at the end are really short, as I said, and I thought the final boss fight was fun at the time, but in terms of setting and scenery and visuals, I'm like, this is really tame. Like, you could have gone wild with this. And they basically put 2 boss fights back to back at the end, just after overlooking a huge point in the story. If anyone remembers, we hear in the first game that Jormungandr, the World Serpent, got sent back in time after being attacked by Thor. And you see it happen because Thor attacks Jormungandr and he just teleports out of existence. And they gloss over it. And then straight after that, you're into a Thor boss fight, and then you're into the Odin boss fight, which has like 2 phases, and then you're done. And I just think it's really, really underwhelming because, it's frustrating because I'm like, man, you had one chance to like do this justice, and then you didn't, as far as I'm concerned. And what's crazy to me is that I know I'm not alone in that, and I've actually seen more criticisms towards Ragnarok in that regard than I did for 2018. Because in some ways, I actually think the pacing and the story consistency and like focus of 2018 is almost better because it's a lot more focused. It's a smaller scale. It has a smaller set of characters, but it deals with them really well. And even if it doesn't have like the crazy boss fights necessarily from the older games, it feels a lot more focused overall, and kind of it achieves its story purpose by the end. And with Ragnarok, it feels like they're dealing with a lot, and they get a lot right, and then they also get a lot wrong. Like for example, one thing that's super weird. That again, spoilers. If you don't know this, but in the post game, so in the main story, you find out that Tyr is actually Odin, and he was disguised as him. And it was a really cool twist, really cool moment, very sudden, very well executed. But then you find that Tyr's actually alive still, and you find him in a prison, and that was like a kind of a shocking moment, but it's never done in like a proper cutscene. It's sort of a weird post-game side quest thing, and then you just find him sat in these different places, and he's like doing nothing. And I understand what they're trying to do and what they were trying to go for with Tyr like being alive still, but I just don't quite understand why they went that route with it, honestly. It feels strange. Uh, so yeah, that and there's again, this is probably another game that needs like a proper deep dive to like go into it fully. But I just overall, and it's even like certain things like, for example, the RPG elements are another thing that we see like them get a pretty. I don't want to call it a substantial overhaul, but they deepen things. They make things a little bit more obvious. They seem to have more bearing on the actual gameplay. I think this time, at least I think anyway. I think it's like certain armor pieces have like better perks that stand out more essentially. But then for some reason, all of the user interface designers just decided to leave Santa Monica after 2018, and the UI is like totally different. And I actually didn't dislike it in 2018, but Ragnarok's UI is quite questionable. It's not awful, but I'm also like, why does it look like this? Why is it not flashier? Why does it not flow better? Why does it not look nice? Like it's just a weird design. I know it's the UI, but it's like that goes hand in hand with these RPG elements that to me when I'm playing it, I'm enjoying the combat and I'm enjoying that moment to moment sort of gameplay, but I'm never quite feeling like it's excelling anything. It's never quite going over the top. It's never really giving me that much depth in the combat. It feels satisfying to play. There's, like they have the finishers where you can finish off enemies with, and there's a bit more gore, and by a bit more gore, I mean you cut off enemies' heads sometimes, or you cut them in half, I guess, um, which is not terrible. Like it's still going forward, but and there's more dynamic combat. Like for example, there's a lot of good. They sort of utilize. You can swing around in combat with certain. You have to wait for a prompt, obviously, but that can lead into a slam attack, and um, you can also like go up to higher ledges using your blade grapple. And the stuff like that that's really cool, and it makes the combat sort of feel better, and it sort of adds a little bit more depth to it. But it never goes beyond that. And what's the one thing that's funny, right? They introduce these triangle moves where you can hold triangle or you tap triangle for the blades, and you essentially get like a powerful attack. I forgot about them for most of the game, and I think the reason why is because you rarely get a chance to properly actually activate them. Because when you're playing it, like I guess you could use the claw in how you play almost, but it's like your right thumb is usually on the right stick, and you usually take your thumb off that to charge these things up. But that means, but you also move slower when you're doing these, and that means you're susceptible to attacks. And you kind of have to like you kind of have to like move really far away from the enemies to actually activate them. And at the end, I just totally forgot about them. And that's a shame because they are some cool moves there. But it's like it was cool that they introduced another thing on the controls, but again, it just doesn't evolve beyond that. I mean, I guess that's kind of a lie. You have a light attack version of it, a heavy attack version, and a throw light and a throw heavy version of it, I think, or a ranged heavy and light and heavy. Sorry, um, and I think the same is for the blades, um, but it just doesn't quite feel like it flows very well with the rest of the combat. And there are ways you can activate it quicker after attacking, but it has to be a very particular window after hitting, and it's a really awkward window to achieve, and it's like a really late unlock as well. And it's so funny because I'm obviously playing Final Fantasy 16 right now, and I'll either get into that into the next Plus episode or this, or later on in this one, depending on how it all goes. Because we're nearly at 40 minutes now. But it's like when I look at Final Fantasy 16 and see what that one's doing, where it fundamentally there's a lot of similarities between God of War and Final Fantasy 16, where you've got these kind of like abilities that you can use. You've also got, on like cooldown abilities, and then you've got the core combat. But there's so many intricacies to Final Fantasy 16's combat where it's like you've got like the range kind of charge attack with the sword. You've got the slam down from above. You can obviously jump in the air. You can jump off enemies. You can unlock that, so you can jump off enemies twice. You can teleport to enemies, pull enemies towards you. You can every time you attack, if you tap your ranged melee attack right after that, you'll basically do like a quick combo, and you can do that for after every attack, and then you can hold those buttons to charge them up, and you can get into a real nice flow, which God of War has sort of the same, but everything's on a much simpler level. It doesn't feel as complex or as over the top and crazy as Final Fantasy 16, which is understandable considering the level design and the camera angle and all these other things. But I just feel like it's God of War, and it's like when you look at those old games, you are jumping around in the air and you're doing all this crazy stuff. And it's not so much to say I want those old games back, because I don't actually think I feel that way necessarily. Because there's a lot I like about these new games. I like the characters, I like the world, I do like the combat, but it just doesn't quite feel like it's excelling. And the same goes for, sure, they've got more enemy types, but again, it doesn't quite feel like they're new enemy types. It doesn't feel like they're really kind of pushing the boundaries for what they can be. And even the bosses. Look, people have said that this game has more memorable bosses, or more, bigger bosses. I agree to some extent. I say I agree to some extent. I think there is more, but I actually think in terms of actual size, the dragon from 2018 is bigger, is more crazier than this one in terms of like the size of enemy you're fighting, and like the fact that, and like when how you finish the boss. Um and it just sort of feels like they never quite go super ambitious with this stuff. I'm sure it is like it's not to say it's not ambitious at all. I don't want to say that, because as I said, there are a lot of things I like. I just sort of feel like it's not as far as they could have gone, and I think given another game, we maybe would have gotten that. But I understand that they don't want to spend however long, I think it would have been like 10, 15 years or whatever on this franchise. So I understand that. Um, well, it's already been 10 years, sorry. It would have been 10 years when it released, approximately. Well, it came out in 2018 and 2022, so they started development in like 2013, 14, I think. So yeah, like 8 years or something, but it would have been close to like 10 to 15 essentially years. So I understand them not wanting to work on like another game, but I do think that they should have handled the story better. And what's more frustrating is that there are also a ton of questions that aren't answered, and it's like I don't quite understand why. I don't understand why there's questions left to answer. I understand maybe leaving some mystery, but it's kind of like it's weird. And what's even crazier is that I know a lot of the God of War community that follow the games a lot had been speculating like, oh, what is this Greek character come back? A lot of people, a lot of like core fans, like, and I mean like true dedicated, hardcore fans from the old games or whatever, really was leaning into like what kind of Greek connection is this game going to have, and it doesn't, question mark, like it, and it just bothers me. It bothers me that like they've taken. I understand them not wanting to have those old games be vital to play this new game, but also understand that Kratos being the same character that he was, in terms of it is the same Kratos back from those old games, that is a huge selling point, and that's one of the things that makes it awesome. And so I almost think that like you design the game and you prepare people with that information that you need. It doesn't necessarily mean you have to play the old games, but it doesn't mean you can't deliver that in a new format in this new game. And considering how much happens in Ragnarok, it feels like 2018 should have had more. What it feels like to me is that Ragnarok has almost like a game and a half's worth of story, and they tried squashing it into one game's worth, but they didn't space it out enough. And like I said before, you spend a while in that early game stuff, but towards the end, it feels like you're getting through a lot of story related points. And by the end, it feels like it's kind of rushed through a lot of things, and you don't quite get to spend time with these characters and properly in this world. And I do, and I think it does hold it back. And so, this has become a very long critique, I guess, of God of War of Ragnarok, but it's just crazy to me that so many people rate this game so highly. Not to say that it doesn't deserve praise, not to say people can't say it's a 10 out of 10 or really enjoy it, but I just don't quite understand the sheer amount of people that rate it highly. It's one of those where it's like, if this is someone's first game or someone's new to games and they play this, then no doubt they're gonna have an awesome experience. It's gonna be all, there's so many great things about it, right? This is gonna blow them away probably, because this, if they've not played games in 10, 15 years, or they're new to games, they're probably like, oh my god, I didn't realize games were doing this kind of thing. But for people that play games like myself and many other people that would probably give this game really high scores, I just don't understand why it's 10 out of 10 like in so many places. It was actually nice because Eurogamer's review of Ragnarok, I remember sort of looking at when I finished the game, and it was nice because it's like, oh, thank God someone agrees with me about the story. Like I felt like I was crazy. I was like, am I just being critical for no reason? It's like, no, thank God someone else agrees with me, because it tries cramming a lot in, it overlooks a lot of stuff, it doesn't give enough time for things, and I think it assumes you understand what's going on sometimes when maybe you don't. And I think that there's also certain parts of the story that I'm just like, wait, why is this there? Again, without spoiling anything, but well, I'll say without spoiling anything, it is a bit of a spoiler. But if you played the game, the character's called the Fates. I remember that scene when you get there was really cool. They kind of build up to the Fates, and they kind of and they seem really cool, and then they have no relevance at all after that. There's so much they could have done. Like, it's like how Athena comes back in 2018, like as an apparition or whatever. And I guess that was just a temporary thing, like showing Kratos' past haunting him, and that was awesome. But it's like, I just feel like they fail. I feel like what I said this with 2018, and I say it again with Ragnarok. They are very good at getting you hyped up, but I don't think they ever live up to the hype really at all. Other than that scene with the blades, and even that I feel like could have gone a little bit further. But I also think that generally that scene is flawless. Um, because what happens is, right, they lead up to it, and they don't. So like, what happens is they build up to you getting the blades. If you're a fan of the game, you know where it's going. If you know Kratos, you know where this is going. And then when you see them, and when you see him put them on, and then you see Athena, and then you get to use them, and then you look in the menu, and it's got a skill tree, and you can upgrade them. It's like, oh, like they didn't just put this in for like an hour of gameplay. No, this is a new weapon. This is This is like additive to the entire experience, and now this is stuck with you for the rest of the game. And I think that's awesome. And there's so many other points where they do similar things and they don't live up to it. And what's funny is, again, spoilers for Ragnarok, but when you get the spear, they build up to it. But I didn't want to get ahead of myself. I was like, I don't want to expect a new weapon because I don't really know if that's what we're getting, And it pays off, and you get not only a really interesting scene the way it's built, but having Brock like bless the spear with his whatever it is, his you need a blacksmith or whatever to sort of bless it, whatever. And it's a really cool scene between Kratos and Brock that I think is one of the game's strongest, and it's almost like as strong or on a similar level to like that ending scenes with Kratos and everything like that. And yeah, so I'll probably leave it there because I am sort of going on now about God of War. I think this is something that I would like to kind of like properly formulate a proper discussion on at some point. But as I said, I've not had a proper chance to actually talk about this, at least in any format, properly. So this is my forum to do it in. And as I said, yeah, not to say people can't say this game's good, not to say people can't enjoy it, but I'm really shocked that so many people say this game is as good as it is, especially when games like Death Stranding get certain critiques, and what's the game like Horizon maybe even gets certain critiques, and even The Last of Us Part 2. Like, there's so many games that get critiques that I'm like, well, if you're criticizing that, fair enough, but why are you criticizing that and not this other one? And it is weird to me that God of War Ragnarok has this amount of hype behind it and this amount of excitement, especially considering what God of War was. And I feel like it comes from a lot of people that weren't necessarily fans of the old games, and not that that's a problem. You can be, that's fine. But it's more my point is it's like, I guess series, franchises can change, but and I'm not against that, but I just don't think it, and it's not only just like the high scores. It's like people saying, oh, this is like way better than the old games, and it's like, man, part of what makes these games as good is that the old games existed, because it's the same goddamn character. And it's, I think the ending of Ragnarok makes the originals game's stories even better, because you're essentially following a character who is seen as this like warlord, this warrior that just kills without thinking and is selfish and just doesn't care about anyone else other than himself. And then by the end of Ragnarok, you're seeing this character who has finally embraced, like, who's learned to kind of like care for others and does genuinely care for them and is protecting people more. And you can see that the mural that you see at the end is a statue of him and people worshipping him because that's what he's become. And you see him like start crying, and it's fucking awesome because it's like, holy shit, like, this is amazing storytelling because you've taken a character through these set of games and then you've brought him through into this new universe, into this new sort of world, and you've told this story here, and you have given him an absolutely incredible ending that makes sense for who he is. They, like, you could have killed Kratos off, but it's like, but that's not interesting. That's not, you're not, there's no, I mean, obviously, I do like redemption stories, but it's redemption stories on this level that I think are so smart that you turn this character into something, and you think about how he was seen at one point and then how you see he was done later, and he kind of, he is the same character in terms of he's a warrior, he's a fighter, he fights, but now he fights to protect and everything like that. And maybe it's cliche, maybe it's like, oh, of course he's a good guy, but it's like, but you can see that for Kratos that means a hell of a lot because he kind of just gave up by the end of God of War 3. um I think that's why he like kills himself, because he's just like, he's kind of done with it. He's done everything, and he doesn't want Athena to have this power that he's kind of achieved, because Athena wants this power, and he's like, no, he's like, you're not having it. So he just offs himself and spreads that power to the world or something like that. Um, and then obviously he survives, and then we see him in this game, in these two games, and the path that he goes on is one that's really compelling and really interesting, and I think extremely well written from a character writing perspective. So it is, while I think the story overall is not particularly great, or like the core narrative, the core events of the game, I think the character development, particularly in regards to Kratos, is really good. And same with Freya. Freya is awesome, by the way. I think Freya's one of my favorite characters in God of War outside of Kratos by the end. And Brock, and there's honestly so many good characters. Mimir, I need a proper discussion about this at some point. There's so many good things to unpack, so many things to criticize, but I think maybe I'll wait until I've played the game and give me God of War for that. We'll give like a proper in-depth. Well, I say in-depth, but you know what I mean. Like I did for the last one, but maybe a bit more comprehensive and all-encompassing of the entire game. Uh, but that's enough of God of War. Let's move on to the next game. I think I am going to split this up into two parts. So this will be part one, and then I will either, probably for next week or sometime, I will talk about my favorite games of this year in particular. I don't know what I'm going to title this though. I'll probably just do my favorite backlog games so far in 2023 or something. So yeah, the next game here is Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order, which I played for the first time this year, and I started it. I think Survivor came out at the end of April. I think I started this at the beginning of April, something like that. I beat the story and platinumed it in about a week. And this was a real surprise, honestly. I really enjoyed this game. Because I, not to think I wasn't going to enjoy it, but I found that the story and characters here, and I was also playing on the highest difficulty as well, so that made the combat like fulfilling for the most part, besides a few like hiccups and feeling a bit clunky and whatever else. But I really enjoyed the characters and story specifically of this game because it was very high quality. It reminds me of almost like Uncharted level, even speaking of God of War, it almost reminds me of like that kind of quality of like acting and graphics and animation, and feeling like you are like watching a Star Wars movie at the same time as like inside of a Star Wars game kind of thing. And that was one thing I actually really liked about the game overall, was that it was enjoyable enough as a game on its own. It didn't feel like, sure, it was a Star Wars game, but it didn't quite feel like it was like obviously a Star Wars game. Like obviously it was a Star Wars game and it is a Star Wars game, but it doesn't feel like that's exactly what you're playing it for, if you know what I mean. Like it's not only a Star Wars game. And so yeah, I really enjoyed that, and I actually would recommend it a lot to people that haven't played or would be interested in any kind of action game, action like story focused game. The one thing I will say is that I remember the level design being kind of frustrating when you're trying to like explore and collect everything, because it's kind of there's no fast travel and you have to run back to your ship, and if you go the wrong way it's very, you have to rely on a map, and the map's not always useful, and it's also like you might think a path looks like it leads to the place you want to go to, but it doesn't, or you get to a dead end and you have to run all the way back, and it's not particularly what's the word, I'm struggling for words today. It's just not very clear as to where you're going, and it's difficult to kind of like backtrack to these old areas and kind of get around the area, which is something the second game does fix. That they have fast traveling and that, and it's so useful. Makes it so much better. Um, but yeah, one thing that's also cool about Fallen Order is you go to a lot of places that are not very obviously Star Wars. They're very new for Star Wars kind of thing, and they're sort of um, you're going to a lot of tombs and sort of caves, and you go to a lot of planets that are in the Star Wars films, I think. But you also go to places like Dathomir, which is, I believe, this is my sister loves Star Wars. She's very knowledgeable about all the Star Wars stuff, or at least quite into it. um, she was telling me about like Dathomir is where Darth Maul apparently comes from, and that's cool because you get to see the Night Sisters, and you actually obviously encounter one of the characters, one of the sort of I think he's dead at the time, but you see obviously someone who's obviously from the same race as Darth Maul, and that's really cool. And that's where you meet Merrin, who's an awesome character. And again, not I keep going on about the story and characters, but there's just this whole crew, Cal, Seer, and what's the I? Why am I forgetting things constantly? God damn it! And again, who's the guy that pilots the ship? Grease, I think is his name. But, him, Cal, Seer, and Merrin are just all great characters, and BD1, of course, you can't forget. And that whole crew by the end is just like a really almost like tight knit crew, and there's just a lot of good banter between them. I think Seer's an awesome character, by the way. She's obviously played by again, I'm just like constantly forgetting things today. Deborah Wilson. Deborah Wilson is who voices her. Same as Savathun in Destiny, and yeah, she's awesome. And obviously, she voices Seer. Or she plays Seer. And he's just a really cool group of characters. Honestly, very cool. And as I said, while I found the level design a bit annoying and the combat could be a little bit finicky at times, uh, it was overall quite fun, honestly. And that difficulty, I think, certainly made certain boss fights feel a lot more fulfilling when I finished them. Um, yeah, I don't really know if there's anything else I got to say on Fallen Order. It was just a really nice experience, honestly, and finishing it and platinum it in a week, it was actually quite nice to play, even if it was a little bit, um, like the level design was a bit annoying and things like that. It was a nice game to just kind of play 100% and kind of, everything kind of just flows quite nicely. Um, and so yeah, that's all I guess I've already got to say for that. I have more to say on Survivor, which is obviously more recent, but also a lot more to kind of like speak about to that. I just think Fallen Order isn't like doesn't blow me away. It's not a like absolutely incredible game, but I think it's probably the best Star Wars game. I guess I don't really know what Star Wars games I've played overall, um, but it's really good, and I just think it's cool because you get to see a lot of the Star Wars universe that you wouldn't otherwise see in the films. And I'd recommend it to people that aren't into Star Wars necessarily, because I think there's a lot of stuff in there that you can kind of glean from it, even if you're not super into Star Wars. So yeah. So anyway, moving on. Next game, I actually covered this on the first episode of what I'm playing. Um, but this is Hitman World of Assassination, and I'm kind of bulking. I'm sort of grouping Hitman 1, 2, and 3, this kind of rebooted sort of versions of the game all together, because this World of Assassination like trilogy, especially all together in this package, is amazing. It's incredible, and it's probably easily my favorite stealth game in a long time. Obviously, there's not much competition there, but I've really found that this has just like reinvigorated my interest and passion for this genre, and it's one that I'm just like wanting to kind of like return to. I haven't actually played it in a few weeks now, but blame every other game going I've got. Or I say I'm trying to play and not everything else coming out. Which thankfully it's a quiet time overall right now, but it's a quiet time ish, other than Final Fantasy 16 dominating like my entire July at this point. I think I've played it every single day at this rate. Um, but yeah, I want to go back to Hitman, and there's so much to Hitman that you can play not only the core content, but also like player created contracts, and then they've got so they sometimes like roll around challenges where you can unlock stuff, like extra costumes and suits and things like that. And there's just so much depth to each of these levels that is like a proper like sandbox, and you really get to kind of delve deep into how you're going to approach them. You I think you technically can go guns blazing. I don't think the game doesn't really reward you for that, but you can. There's a bunch of different weapons that you can use. You can find a vantage point, use a sniper. You can disguise yourself to get in. You can see if you can do it without changing your disguise. You know, there are so many different ways that you can kind of play around to get your targets in these levels that is just unmatched, I think, in any other stealth game of this kind. You know, I mean, I don't think there is any other stealth game of this kind, but in terms of like the freedom, this this kind of freedom is like almost like what I think Metal Gear Solid 5 was trying to go for. But Metal Gear Solid 5, because it was open world, it doesn't quite funnel you into these levels particularly well. And so what happens is that it almost becomes too easy at times. Sometimes it can be difficult, but you're not really fully experimenting because there's not the replay value isn't there. There's no reason to keep replaying. Hitman is obviously a little bit more. You kind of invent your own fun. You invent that, but then there are things like the challenges you can complete for rewards, the XP you earn for each location, as well as the contracts and things like that. And I actually wonder if like stealth games could use more of this kind of this contract sort of formula. I was actually thinking the other day. I was like, man, imagine if Hitman had a level editor where you could like properly create like fully like levels or was it like what was the thing I was thinking of? It might have just been I don't know if I'd really thought too much on it, but I just thought the idea of a level editor in Hitman would be incredible, and I people would spend years on that. I think, as I'm sure they already do with these kind of player created contracts, because there's just so many. And I saw one the other day that a friend was looking at, and it was literally like it was like the if you played Hitman, it's the very first. Is it the first? It's the first like proper level like test that you do, which is in the ICA facility, and you've got like the boat. You've got to check out a character called Calvin, I think, or Kelvin or something like that. And the literal like target, like you could actually, I didn't realize you could go as crazy as this. Like all of the targets was literally like every NPC. So it was just like just eliminate everyone, and it's ridiculous. But it's like I couldn't believe that actually it got to that extent. I actually always thought it was like limited to like 6 targets or something at most, but clearly not. Clearly you can go crazy, and these contracts are cool because it's almost like, from what I understand, the level editor in Mario Maker, where it's like you come up with these like you essentially play the level you want it to be played, and then you can kind of like I guess tweak what you want specifically and what the settings are, and but you have to kind of you have to kind of like make sure it is possible to do essentially, um, and then you essentially I think that's how it works. I've actually never created a contract, but that is something that I should probably look into. There's a trophy for it as well, so that's a bit of a driver to getting it to actually trying out contracts. I'm never really into like creating stuff in games like that. I'm just more like I just want to play what the people have made. That's generally my how I feel. But yeah, sometimes it's fun to mess around with. I think if you had like a tight knit community that was all kind of like playing the game together and doing that, I think that'd be really cool. Um, but yeah, Hitman's just really great. Honestly, if you're looking for a stealth game or just value for money, honestly, just inherently, the World of Assassination is a great sort of package for Hitman. And from my understanding, you can probably buy them physically still, but you can't buy these Hitman games separately at the moment. So I would just if you're not sure what to buy, just buy World of Assassination, or I think you can download a free trial and just kind of go into the game and just have a look that way. Because you can play all of Hitman 1, 2, and 3 in that same game, and so it's better than just kind of like trying to figure out, oh, which one do I need to buy? It's like is only one package to buy, and that's the World of Assassination sort of complete, package or whatever. So yeah, 100% do that. And yeah, last game I'll talk about here is one that was totally I bought a while back actually, and I'm sort of obviously in typical me fashion, I didn't get to it till a while later. But it's Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, which I can't really say too much on this because I've only played a few hours of it, but it's honestly really surprised me because I'm not typically someone who plays a lot of kart races or just racing games in general, and so going into this was kind of new, sort of like it's been a long time since I played like a kart racer. A lot of the time, like Jack X and Burnout, they were my jam when I was younger. Jack X is awesome, by the way, which I also want to play. I haven't played. I have played Jack X on PS4, but I've not played it on like my account properly on PS4 and 5. Um, what's weird is there's actually frame rate issues on Jack X on PS4, and I'm hoping that they're ironed out on the PS5 version, or just the PS5, emulating it, whatever, because I can't believe that there's. I don't know if the frame issues are like sort of bound to the original version or something like that, or if that's for some reason just weird optimization. But yeah, Mario Kart is just super fun, honestly, and it was actually quite a chill game. Obviously, I wasn't playing particularly competitively. I wasn't really winning very much. I spoke about this in the last episode as well. Um, but I would just consider it like, even though it's not been like, like, it probably never would never be like, oh, game of the year or whatever for me, but it's been just a really pleasant experience, and seeing everything it has to offer is really cool, because it sort of suggests like, oh man, there's a lot to tap into here with Mario Kart, and makes me want to go and check out the game more. And there's actually a lot I do want to go back to it at some point. Um, as I do with many other games, but it's just like, it seemed like a fun game. Put it on for 30 minutes, an hour, or whatever else. Fun co-op game, fun party game sort of thing. And I was really impressed with all of the different tracks as well. There's a lot of different variety, level design ideas. And it's cool that they've obviously been releasing both remastered old maps and new maps still with this booster course pass or whatever. So yeah, not really much else to sort of talk about there with Mario Kart, but certainly fun, and I was been really surprised by it. I guess one I should probably chuck in here as well, just as a quick mention. I wasn't going to talk about Breath of the Wild, which I kind of, but you'll know if you listen to my last episode as well, um, the main episode for what I'm playing, the first podcast episode. That I mentioned about playing Breath of the Wild. I didn't include that here because I was like, I don't know if I would like consider it one of my favorite games, but technically based on my experience with Tears of the Kingdom, which I would consider one of my favorite games this year so far, Breath of the Wild should be here as well, because for some reason that game just clicked with me this year. I'm on a bit of a Nintendo focus, honestly. Recently, there's a lot of games I want to check out on the Switch. I still need to check out the Pikmin 4 demo. Hopefully, I can do that this weekend, maybe. But I don't know if I'll be getting Pikmin 4. There's just too many games, and Final Fantasy 16 is certainly holding me back from fully kind of getting into that right now. Um, but yeah, that'll wrap it up here. I will obviously, this has not gone to plan as I had planned. I thought this was gonna be like, oh yeah, okay, I can talk about all this in about an hour. This was actually, I was thinking, like, in my mind, I was like, this section would be 20 minutes, and then the other section would be um like 40 minutes or something. It'd be a nice hour, but we are way over that. And I think spending a lot of time on Black Ops 3 style and God of War, and I think BioShock I spent a while talking about as well. Um, that's kind of led to this excessive growth in length, which that's not what she said. Um, but yeah, that'll leave it here. I think I will aim to sort of get this other set recorded. Probably, I'm looking at it probably tomorrow. I think is probably what I'll do. I'll record that other half of this. So this will go up. My intent was to put this up today. Whether this will go up today, that'll be July 7th, 19th. And then Friday this week, I wanted to talk about my thoughts on Solstice in Destiny. I think I'll still be doing that, but obviously, if I'm recording this other part, that might push things a bit back. We'll see. But I think I'll definitely aim to get this other part recorded for next week, and I'll talk about my favorite games, next week, basically. And that might work out quite nicely, because I might be able to finish Final Fantasy 16 by next week, and then I'll be able to kind of talk a bit more about that, though. I think I don't see what I've written. Like, I've written notes. I don't feel like that's going to change from when I finish the game. Who knows? We'll see, of course. But yeah, that'll wrap it up here. I appreciate listening. Be sure to, as I sort of said at the beginning, be sure to leave any comments you've got in below, to let me know what your thoughts on both what I've sort of spoken about, but also, what are your favorite games? What have you enjoyed? As I said, this will probably go up today, hopefully, and then I'll be back hopefully next Monday with another episode of what I'm playing, where I'll be talking about recent news. We'll get to talk on a bit more about the Microsoft Activision deal. Hooray! Well, I don't have to talk about that, but I probably will. I can't help myself. I don't actually know what else has been going on news-wise. That's something I'm gonna have to research. I feel like not much has been happening, but that might just be me. It feels like a quiet time though in general right now. I think things will slowly start to pick up again soon, but we'll see. Um, but yeah, that'll be it. Let me know what your favorite games are from your backlog. If you've played anything, what are things you want to check out? Be sure to let me know in the comments below. And I will talk to you, or I'll see you all next time. So have a good one, and I'll see you in the next episode. Ciao, ciao, ciao.